As Pfizer's vaccine starts to get distributed this week, and also as we prepare for Moderna potentially being next in line, we want to talk about, or take a look, I should say, at the role that a U.S. defense agency played in preparing the U.S. to produce a vaccine very quickly. And for that, we want to bring in Regina Dugan. She's a former head of Darpa. And we also have our very own reporter, Anjali Kamlani, joining the conversation. Regina, let me just start with the fact that, I guess, explain to us how DARPA's investments over the last several years, going back even more than a decade or so, have helped accelerate the race that we have seen for a COVID vaccine and have gotten us to this point that we have been able to get to so quickly.
Sure. Well, you should know that DARPA was formed after Sputnik in 1958 with the goal of preventing and creating strategic surprise. So big questions about risks and vulnerabilities and new capabilities that we might create were routine at DARPA. And what I remember was a pivotal moment in 2010. So we were contemplating new programs, and a program manager by the name of Dan Wattendorf asked two big what ifs. He said, what if we have a global pandemic and it's a novel pathogen? That will be catastrophic. We can't wait the normal 3 to 10 years for a vaccine. And what if instead we could use mRNA to create a vaccine in days and weeks instead of the normal year-long timelines, 3 to 10 years? So what's important is that at that time, DNA vaccines had been tried. They made protein, but they didn't produce enough. They lacked potency. So there wasn't a strong immune response. And Dan argued that mRNA could be different. And there were a lot of critics at the time. They argued that there was no evidence it would work. And Dan argued there was no evidence that it wouldn't work. And if it did, someday it would matter. And that day has come.
Regina, I know that one of the things that's really interesting about this is that the mRNA technology is getting its time in the limelight right now. We have seen Pfizer roll out. We've also seen some of the concerns about, whether or not the myths about whether or not it can alter your DNA, but then also some of the side effects. And so I wonder, based on what you're seeing and based on your understanding of the technology, is this something we can expect? Is it normal to kind of go through this process of side effects, et cetera, with the vaccine?
I think that's a normal progression in the investigation of safety for vaccines. Now, remember, our charge was to create the possibility. And I think we need to understand how remarkable an achievement this is. We went from virus sequence to first dosing in humans in 63 days. It's unprecedented. Now, we still have the hard work to do to determine efficacy and to understand distribution and all of those things, but the first step is to have a vaccine candidate that creates an immune response and offers protection. Now, my sense is that this will be one of the most important scientific achievements of our generation, and certainly in the top 5 contributions for DARPA, which was also responsible for the early investments in the internet and GPS.
Absolutely. Regina, when we're talking about, healthcare right now and the speed at which this was done, we know that this administration specifically focused a lot on public-private partnerships, dealing with not just the healthcare companies, but also the tech companies for the rollout of software that will track some of these adverse events and the safety monitoring. You have been part of that world before, and I just wonder, what is your sense of the ability for big tech to really walk into this healthcare space that has been kind of technologically slow, but also is so complex?
Well, look, I firmly believe in public-private partnerships. And in fact, when we made the investment in Moderna at DARPA, they were 3 people. And these early investments are important. And now we see what's happened with the investment of private capital. We now also have to consider what other established tech companies might bring to the table in terms of their reach, in terms of their scale. These are very important considerations. But I think central to the question is also, what do we need by way of new breakthroughs? How do we ask the new what if questions for public health and human health? And in fact, it's the reason I accepted the CEO role at Wellcome Leap, which was formed by the Wellcome Trust with an initial funding of $300 million and a specific mandate And that is to ask the next what if questions to create the next round of breakthroughs for human health. We need to do those things at scale, and we need to do them in partnership.
Regina, I love reading these stories because to me, this is like Mission Impossible. It's kind of like what I thought was going to be happening if we were ever hit by a pandemic. And then it didn't exactly go by the movie script. And a lot of that blame has been laid at the Trump administration, whether or not it's what happened with the CDC or the pandemic handbook. So the fact that what you're talking about, this actually worked with Darpa. So are those what if questions still being asked? Because there's a lot of concern about, the deep state and what's been able to be taken down and what survived the last 4 years. Are you confident that the government and Darpa are still asking those questions and going to come up with the solutions for the next time this happens?
Well, I think DARPA is in steady state, as I understand it. DARPA has historically had about 0.5% of the DoD budget. It's an amazing organization with respect to the leverage it offers. Small investment, but right at these pivotal places where we need the kind of risk-tolerant investments. But in health, we also see private organizations like Wellcome Trust, like the Gates Foundation, others stepping up and beginning to ask those kinds of what if questions as well. We definitely need to do that at scale. And I think it's clear human health, global health is going to require that of us. It is not only a moral investment, it is also an economic investment, as we're seeing in this current pandemic.
Regina Dugan, great to have you on the show, former head of DARPA. And of course, Anjali Kamlani, always great to have you part of these conversations. Regina, thanks so much. We'll talk to you again, hopefully once again soon.